So, Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. We are in our second part series of Derech HaPsak by Chachmei Morocco and Chachmei Ma'arav, as it's called. And just to recap what we said last time, because this is going to be a continuation. What was mentioned last time was the acceptance of Kabbalat Piskei Maran Shulchan Aruch was something that not only was accepted by Chachmei Ma'arav, but it was more or less initiated by Chachmei Ma'arav more than other edot. They really were the pioneers in Kabbalat Piskei Maran. And the reason was this klal of tre migo telat, 2 out of 3, was already ingrained deeply in the Derech HaPsak and Mesorah from the Mari Beirav that gave it over to Maran Bet Yosef, and that is how it was given over. And this is why, if you notice, a lot of the Haskamot of Rav Ovadia Yosef Shlita, when he writes that Kibalnu Piskei Maran, his flagship that he always writes is the Teshuvah from the Mishpat Uzdaka B'Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Ibn Sur, one of the greatest Chachamim of Morocco in the 1700s. He was on the Bedin Gadol with Rav Yehuda ben Atar, known that the Orach HaKadosh went to them for Askama, and they were the great Rabbanim at the time. Rabbi Yaakov Ibn Sur writes in Chelek Bet Siman He that Kibalnu Horaat Maran. That is, Mishpat Uzdaka B'Yaakov is what Rav Ovadia Yosef quotes when he introduces and pushes the concept of Kabbalat Piskei Maran. We also mentioned last week what Sherut Utshuvot Edud Be'Yehosef of Rabbi Yosef ben Samaon, and I'm going to read his lashon. It's a very long teshuvah in Siman Nun Tet that he has on Umdana, and in middle of that teshuvah, I'm just going to read the whole lashon because it's so important. He says, "Ve'im ken mi yishma ledavar zeh shekvar yadua umeforsam bechol ha'olam be'eretz Yisrael ubechutz la'aretz mimizrach umima'arav mitzafon umiyam she'en lanu ela piskei maran bashulchan aruch ve'kvar nitpashtu bechol ha'olam ve'kiblu alem ve'sugya de'alma kavatayu והם מיוסדים על אדני פז עמודי ההוראה שלושה, הם ההרי והרמב"ם והראש, ודין זה משרבו והסכימו הוא לשון הרמב"ם הלכות סנהדרין, ודבר זה מוחזק ומקוים אצלנו במערב יותר ויותר מכל העולם לעשות כפסקי מרן ושולחן ערוך בכל עניין. So this is what he writes as a davar pashut, that this was accepted b'ma'arav in a very strong form. And as we mentioned last week, this was the opinion of all Chachmei Morocco, belo yotze min haklal. Belo yotze min haklal, the foundation of our psak is Kabbalat Piskei Maran. But it's much more than that. It's much more than that. We're going to see that this deviates from different psakim that we have nowadays. First of all, as we know in klalim, there's always exceptions to klalim, no matter what. There's no such thing as an absolute klal. A klal has many yotze min haklals. And over here, there's no difference. We spoke last week about the Rosh and his hashpa'ah on psak, and I was asked afterwards, so where does this manifest itself? So the first thing the most important nafkamina where it manifests itself is why the Shulchan Aruch picked out of the 3 Amudei Olam, the Rif, Rosh, and Rambam, why the Shulchan Aruch picked specifically the Rosh out of everyone else, and we explained because he was Rabbam Shel HaSfaradim. So a lot of psak that we have in the Shulchan Aruch that we follow is mushtat al pi the Rosh. He's one of the 3. That's number 1. So it comes up in thousands of places, correct? However, throughout halacha, we'll see that the minhag of Klal Yisrael, and particularly the Moroccans, was there were certain minhagim like the Rosh that were exceptions. For example, Maran is posek in Siman Resh Nun Gimel. We're going to take a tour today on a lot of different places in Shulchan Aruch. I'm first going to start with places that we see that is like the Rosh. In Maran in Shulchan Aruch, in Orach Chaim Siman Resh Nun Gimel, talks about when you need a covering on a fire to put food on before Shabbat, Shehiyah. And there's a machloket between Rabbanan and Chananya whether Shehiyah is when it's fully cooked or if it's enough ma'achal ben drasai. Shulchan Aruch is posek like the Yesh Omrim that you have to have it fully cooked. However, the Shulchan Aruch brings the opinion of the Rosh that even kimachal ben drasai is enough. The minhag is like the Rosh over here, and the Rosh has famous words brought in the Bet Yosef that says Bishvil sherabu adeot b'ay piska v'Yisrael adukin b'mitzvat oneg Shabbat. We are addicted literally to oneg Shabbat. We have never heard anyone to be machmir. Hanach lehem a minhag, that the minhag is like Hananya. This was the minhag by all Sfaradim. The Zichor LaAvraham Eretz HaChaim Sethon Siman Resh Nun Gimel says this was the minhag al pi the Rosh. Maran ben Chabib in Morocco for sure. Bishalom Esas Reis Orach Chaim Siman Chafei. Rav Ovadia Yosef and Yabi Omer Chelik Vav Siman Lamed Bet says this is also the minhag, not like Maran, based on the Rosh. Number 2, the Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Yud Chet Siv Gimel and Orach Chaim about Ksut Laila. If somebody sleeps with something that is worn usually for night wear, but he wears it during the day, so do you put on tzitzit or not? So Machloket, Rosh and Rambam. And the Bet Yosef writes the minhaga pashut like the Rosh, not to wear tzitzit. That's the Bet Yosef. Orach Chaim Siman Taf Resh Mem Gimel. Whether we do kiddush of the sukkah standing and then we sit by saying leshev basukah, right? And if you see a lot of Edut HaMizrach, they stand by kiddush and by leshev basukah they sit. Our minhag by kiddush of the night of the Sukkot, we stand also when we say leshev basukah. This minhag is based on the Rosh. The Rosh says that way. Another example, Maran writes regarding leshev basukah as well, over there in the same Siman Siv Gimel, that the minhag is to make a bracha on sukkah after Birkat HaMotzi. Right? We say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, then leshev basukah. Edut HaMizrach, I don't think do that, if I'm not mistaken. This is our minhag. This is also the opinion of the Rosh. Furthermore, in Ilchot Chanukah, this is a very famous machloket over here, that the Shulchan Aruch says if there's many people in the home, they should only light one candle. And the Rama says that everybody should light, everybody from the Bnei Abayit should light. And the Taz already says, it's chidush that the Sfaradim go like Tosfot over here. But that's not so much of a chidush. What the Taz asks, why the Sfaradim go according to Tosfot and not like the Rambam? Because in Sfarad, the minhag was like the Rosh. And the Rosh was noheg like this. Okay? That's another example by Ilchot Chanukah. Another example by saying Anenu in all of the tefillot. That means on Tzom Gedalia that's just coming up, Arvit already, even though you're going to eat, you still say Anenu. We're going to see that's the opinion of Maran as well. But that's the Bet Yosef brings, and it's based on, even though Edut HaMizrach don't do this, we do according to the Minhag Sfarad that the Rosh brings down. Furthermore, Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Ayin Daled writes to make Borei Pri HaGefen on Leil HaSeder on the first and third cup. That's like the Rosh, not like the Rama. That says like the Rif to make a bracha. The Rama says like the Rif, you make a bracha on every single kos, but we do like the Rosh over here. Furthermore, I heard this he'ara from the Rosh Yeshiva Los Angeles over here, Eliezer Gross, that the Maral Bach in Siman Ayin Tet writes that the minhag of Sfarad is to shake on all 6 corners based on the Rosh. Okay, nowadays we do more Api Kabbalah, but the original minhag wasn't that. So these are some minhagim that were accepted, once again, based on the Rosh. And this actually explains also why the Sefer Noeg B'Chochma writes the following in Daf Resh Mem. he writes like this: Minhage Fez Rubam Kikulam Miyusadim Al Divrei Harav Abu Draham. Right? For some reason, the Abu Draham was very heavily accepted. Why? Why out of everyone? Why not the Agur? Why not the Rokeach? Why the Abu Draham? The answer is that Abu Draham lived in that same area of Sfarad, which is not Catalonia. And then there's a sefer called Yediot Nechbadot from Rav Aaron Gabay Shlita, Talmid Chacham, who lives in the south of Eretz Yisrael. And he writes that the Ramban himself in Milchamot, Brachot Daf Mem Daled, writes, Sifrei Sfarad Yoter Ne'emanim Misifrenu. So he calls his books not Sfarad. He was Katlona more. He says the books of the Sfaradim. Sfaradim is the area of Castilia that we're talking about more, which is the Tur, the Rosh, the Ran. Magid Mishte brings that down, those minagim, and we'll see why this makes a big difference. This is going to lead us into our discussion today. Is how does the Kabbalat Piskei Maran Etzel Chachmei Ma'arav compare to Kabbalat Piskei Maran in other edot? Many, I know that Rav Ovadia Yosef made it his life mission to restore Piskei Maran, and it was mainly based because the Chachamim of Baghdad went a lot according to different things of Kabbalah, and sometimes it deviated from Maran. So he was very much pushing this agenda of Kabbalat Piskei Maran. For some reason, people confused his words, and they say it in a way that almost sounds accusatory that other edot in Sfarad, whether it's Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Turkey, are less committed to Maran than what he is proposing. Now, there was nobody greater in knowledge of all the Sfarim of Chachmei Morocco than Rav Ovadia Yosef. He had all of the Sfarim of Chachmei Morocco in front of him, and he quoted them extensively. So he obviously knew how important Kabbalat Piskei Maran were by Chachmei Morocco, and every time when he emphasizes this point of Kibalnu Orot Maran, he quotes Chachmei Morocco as his main basis. But it seems to be that some are confused on this, and they think somehow that in Morocco Kabbalat Piskei Maran wasn't so strong, and they say, well, you have to accept Maran. And this is where there's it gets confusing. First of all, Rav Ovadia Yosef was adamant that in Eretz Yisrael you have to do like Maran. And the question, I asked this question to him and to his students, and he never ever got a clear answer on this, is that I don't know what that means. How did we accepted just like Rav Ovadia Yosef himself has many exceptions to his rule, so too Chachmei Morocco have many exceptions to his rule. For example, I had the zichut on Tisha B'Av for many years of praying in a minyan in Shmuel HaNavi where Rabbi Shalom Misas prayed, and I would remember that I had the unique zichut of picking him up and putting him back on the floor, and always at night he would say like this. He would say, anybody who comes with tefillin tomorrow morning, please don't come to shul. Imagine a rabbi saying, don't come with your tefillin to shul. But that's what he said. Right? Because it's Tisha B'Av, we don't wear tefillin. Shulchan Aruch writes not to wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av in the morning. There were some years where I wasn't able to go to that minyan, and I stumbled upon the Moroccan minyan in the Bet Knesset of Yechavedat of Rav Ovadia Yosef's son, and I was shocked that they wore tefillin. How is it against Piskei Maran? The answer is Rav Ovadia Yosef says that the minhag is like minhag Bet El in Yerushalayim to wear tefillin against Maran, and that's a lot of times he will say he has minhagim, not like Maran. So I'm just saying, just like according to his opinion or his derech or his masoret or other rabbanim that say go like Maran, but they have their masoret not like Maran in certain things. Chachamim Morocco also had certain cases where they deviated from Maran. I'm going to give some famous examples and some less famous examples, but I want to stress this point that it is clear to me, and I would like, if anybody knows different, to let me know. It is clear to me that the Kabbalah of Piskei Maran by Morocco was much stronger than any other Iddah, including those who follow the Psakim of Rav Ovadia Yosef. Let me start with one example. Yesterday, I had a Shiva Birachot. And by the Shiva Birachot, we make a bracha on the kos. How many kosot do we have? So Maran writes in Even HaEzer Siman Tzadi Samich Bet that you only make Sheva Berachot on one kos. And that is indeed our custom. You could look at Magen Avot, Even HaEzer, Siman Samech Bet for more details. And if you don't have it, I send one with David Ben Lolo. And he'll be there. He'll be back there. So there you have one. You have no excuse. It's also on HebrewBooks.org. Now, and it's written like this: that when the Maran says that one cup is for Birkat HaMazon and Sheva Berachot. It's the Shita of the Rishonim. And the nafkamina is that you would make, just like under the Chuppah, Borei Pri Hagef in the first Beracha. The minhag of the Ashkenazim and of Edut HaMizrach is to have 2 cups, not like Maran. And the Birkat Borei Pri Hagef is at the end. Rav Ovadia Yosef writes, look it up, Yabia Omer Chelek Tet Even HaEzer Siman Chav Bet, that this was one of the minagim that changed after Maran. Usually, he's a big proponent. Everybody knows there's a big machloket, Rav Ovadia Yosef, Rabbi Or Letzion, whether minagim that evolved after Maran, do we follow or not? Rav Ovadia Yosef, absolutely not. Anything that evolved after Maran, we don't follow. Over here, he says, it happened after Maran, and that's still the minhag, 2 kosot. The Moroccan minhag brought down, this was the minhag Sfarad. A lot of times you'll notice in learning, the tour brings minhag Sfarad. A lot of times, Chachmei Morocco, that's what they did. And over here, Maran was posek this way, and that's what we do as well. Another example, in Even HaEzer, Siman Lamed Bet, this is less common nowadays, but Maran is posek that the main bracha of Birkat Irusin is Mekadesh Amo Yisrael. And you don't say Al Yedei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. As a matter of fact, I know there are still places nowadays, like in Venezuela, that whoever's left there, that they do, that they don't end off Al Yedei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. That was the original minhag. It changed. Even Rabbi Shalom Mizash says it changed, but that was the original minhag. That's Maran's opinion. Rav Ovadia Yosef Yabia Omer Chelek Even HaEzer Siman Vav says it happened afterwards, but it changed. So the original minhag by Morocco was to do al yidei Mekadesh Amo Yisrael. It'll be a different discussion. Why don't we restore back that original minhag? When do we restore minhagim or not? I'm just giving you a perspective over here. I'm going to rattle off a few more minhagim where we do like Maran and many of the Edut HaMizrach don't. Number 1 is by Brit Milah. This drives me crazy. When I go to Brit Milah and I see that the Avia Ben is Moroccan and he does the bracha v'leachniso bebrito shel Avram Avinu before the Brit Milah. Hare Maran Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Reish Samech Sif Aleph that the bracha is in between the Milah to the Priya, and this is what the Ashkenazim do as well. And this is and Rav Ovadia Yosef has a whole long teshuvah to justify the minhag of the Rashbam. And Rabbi Shalom Mizash asks, what happened all of a sudden that you do against Maran over here? What happened? It was a minhag that Edut HaMizrach had, but we were committed over here to Maran. Furthermore, in Siman Tav Kutsadeh Samiche, we mentioned beforehand, our minhag is to say Anenu on Friday at night. As a matter of fact, I always forget to do it, so my brother reminds me usually, don't forget to say Anenu tonight, because he's ahead of time. He's in Montreal, so he reminds me. Otherwise, I forget, because it's not in most Sidurim, but in the original, look in the Sidur Avotenu, in our Sidur, it's written Anenu at night. On Tzon Gedalia, Asara B'Tevet, and Yudzayin B'Tamuz. And that is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. Again, Edut HaMizrach don't do like Shulchan Aruch over here. Furthermore, when there's many Kohanim, the Kohanim start saying Yivarichecha. Some Edut HaMizrach don't do that. But this was Maran's opinion. In Siman Kuf Chav Chet. By Yamim Noraim, when I grew up, there would be one person that would say the Tefillah out loud. Maran writes that in Siman Tav Kuf Pei Bet. Nowadays it bothers people, so we don't do it, but that's the original minhag. Again, like Maran. Tefillin on Tisha B'Av, we mentioned, we wear tefillin like Maran, where Edut HaMizrach don't. Let me give you a common misconception on the bracha of Halel. Maran writes to make the bracha on Halel. He writes different opinions. He writes one opinion. Here, let me get the Lashon out exactly in Ilchot Rosh Chodesh. Sorry, it's Taf Chaf Bet. וקוראים הלל בדילוג, על חצי הלל, בין ביחיד בין בציבור. ויש אומרים שהציבור מברכין עליו תחילה לקרוא את ההלל, ולבסוף יהללוך. והיחיד אין מברך אותה. That is the opinion of the Rif. ויש אומרים שאף הציבור אין מברך עליו, לא תחילה ולא בסוף. זה דעת הרמב"ם, וכן נוהגים בכל ארץ ישראל וסביבותיה. So the minhag in Eretz Yisrael, like the Rambam, is not to make a bracha on Hallel. What's the minhag of Sfarad? The Shulchan Aruch, the Bet Yosef writes, quoting the Ran, the Magid Mishnah, that the minhag in Sfarad was like the Rif, to make a beracha, betzibur, not beyachid. Ashkenazim follow the Rama, v'yesh omrim gam yachid mevarech alav. There's three opinions. First opinion is ben betzibur ben beyachid. You say that's the minhag of Ashkenazim. The second opinion is the Rif, the betzibur but not beyachid. That's the minhag of the Sfaradim. Not only the Sfaradim. This was the original minhag. I looked and I asked the original Syrian minhag. I asked the original Persian minhag. The most Sephardic and Edut HaMizrach, the minhag is to make the brachat chila v'sof. Eretz Yisrael v'svivotea went like the Rambam. Now, how did Maran himself do? It is very mistaber that Maran himself made a bracha on Halel. He was from Sfarad, and it's most probable that even when he moved to Eretz Yisrael, he didn't change, because there's a whole long discussion in the Shirot Uchuvot Bet Yosef between him and the Mabit regarding Allah in Hilchot Ketubot, whether the minhag should have been like Eretz Yisrael, which they called the Misto Aravim, kind of like the Toshavim, and those who came from Sfarad. And the Bet Yosef writes vehemently, Lo shaninu minhagenu mishum minhag me'az shebanu misfarad. Bet Yosef was very strong that he never changed any minhag when he went to Eretz Yisrael. So it's very probable that Bet Yosef himself kept his original minhag of Sfarad even when he moved to Eretz Yisrael. You want to know the minhag of Eretz Yisrael, the Misto Aravim, the Toshavim, like the Rambam. So there's no question that a Sfaradi in Chutz La'aretz, a Moroccan, and it could be other Sfaradim, for sure has to make a bracha b'tzibur. There's no question about it. Ben b'tchila ben basof. In Eretz Yisrael, I'll speak about it another time, how we should also make a bracha there, but that's a different discussion. But it frustrated me because I would be sometimes in places. I'm sorry, I guess sometimes it's just lack of knowledge sometimes that I saw Moroccan Bati Knesset in Chutz La'aretz. I couldn't believe it that they didn't make a bracha on Halal b'tchila v'sof. And I was so bothered by this that I asked Rav Yitzchak Yosef. I told him people are being mistaken because they're reading your Sefarim, and in your Sefarim it's written that not to make a bracha, and they get confused. They think that applies to Eretz to Chutz La'aretz. And he wrote to me, and it's a letter printed in Magen Avot, that absolutely in Chutz La'aretz, he remembers when Rav Ovadia Yosef visited France, the Chazan said a bracha on Halel b'tchila v'sof, and he obviously didn't say anything because that was the minhag. So he writes at the end that if everybody wants to change the minhag, maybe they're allowed. That there's it would be a different discussion on that point. But of course, the original minhag is to make a bracha on Halel b'tchila v'basof, like the minhag of the Rif, and this was the minhag of the Sfaradim. It's something very important that has to be emphasized. That what does a Sephardi do when he's in an Ashkenazi minyan? What does a Sephardi do when he's a minyan of Edut HaMizrach? He wakes up late and he goes to Edut HaMizrach. So then it's called a tzibur, the Meiri is mashma, that he could still make a bracha, b'tchila v'basof. For sure, if you're in a yeshiva where there's a mix, some Edut HaMizrach don't do a bracha on Halel. One person should make a bracha that his minhag is to make, to be motzi everyone, at least they're yotze all the opinions. I think that should be the proper thing, but I don't know who's the posik in the yeshiva, but I think that definitely should be the proper anaga, because first of all there's Ashkenazim, right, and then there's Edut Ma'arav. By Persians, a lot of them changed now, they don't do a bracha, but their original minhag, you ask the elders, they'll all tell you they used to make a bracha. So it's interesting. It's an interesting thing that they think it's a machlok, it's Sfardim Ashkenazim. It's a big mistake. Sfardim made a bracha. Edut hamisto aravim in Eretz Yisrael went like the Rambam not to, and Ashkenazim always made a bracha even b'yachid. What would that be enough kamina for Moroccans that don't pray with a minyan? They stay at home and they're saying Hallel. They don't make a bracha. They don't make a bracha. Lo betchila v'lo basof. So these I think what we discovered today was something very important, that the minhag, the Kabbalah Piskei Maran, we've seen many places where Chachmei Morocco were adamant in keeping, and the minhag was like the original minhag of Maran, where other Edut HaMizrach deviated from Maran. There are places in Morocco that sometimes went against Maran, and that happens not very often, less than other Edot, but it could happen also because there's no klal. There's no absolute klal that applies all the time. That we should know in halacha already. That's how we view this interesting, very fascinating topic of Kabbalat Piskei Maran. Okay? I think that wraps it up for today. If there's any questions.